Let's start with something that isn't easy to admit. Some of the strongest people you know, the ones who seem independent, composed, and totally in control, are carrying a silent emotional burden. I'm talking about people with what's known as an avoidant attachment style. Now, I don't want you to think this is some clinical label to be tossed around lightly. It's a pattern, a deeply rooted survival strategy. And if you're avoidant or love someone who is, you know exactly what I mean. The avoidant person learned early in life that depending on others wasn't safe. That emotional expression, especially the kind that reveals need or vulnerability, wasn't met with comfort, but maybe with rejection, inconsistency, or even shame. So what do you do when your environment teaches you that love is unreliable? You adapt. You armor up. You build a wall between your inner world and the people around you. This is where the avoidant attachment begins to take form. It says, I'm safer when I don't rely on anyone. It says, emotions? I'll keep them neat, tidy, and private, thanks. And over time, this pattern starts to shape everything. How you form relationships, how you respond to stress, how you even define success or intimacy. You stop reaching out when you're in pain. You pride yourself on independence. You stay 2 steps ahead emotionally because closeness feels like a threat, not a comfort. But here's the thing most people miss. Avoidants aren't cold. They're not heartless. In fact, they often feel just as deeply, sometimes even more so. But those feelings are buried under layers of detachment and self-reliance. It's like they've locked their true selves in an emotional safe, and only the most specific, unthreatening key will ever open it. And most people never find that key. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Psychologically, this pattern makes perfect sense. When you're a child and your core needs, emotional attunement, safety, affection, aren't met consistently, your brain wires itself for protection, not connection. That's not weakness, that's adaptation, that's survival. And that wall, it wasn't built out of ego, it was built out of necessity. But here's where the plot thickens. As that avoidant child grows into an adult, they enter relationships, romantic, platonic, professional, and those old defenses don't just disappear. They show up in subtle but powerful ways. They minimize conflict to keep the peace. They pull away when things get too close. They shut down rather than open up. And on the outside, it looks like composure. But on the inside, it's often emotional numbness or chronic anxiety masked as calm. Philosophically, it raises an interesting question. Can you truly be free if you're still living according to a script you didn't choose? If you're protecting yourself from pain so effectively that you also miss out on love, joy, connection, what are you really protecting? Avoidance isn't just a defense, it's a sacrifice, one that trades intimacy for safety and vulnerability for control. And while avoidance may think they've outsmarted heartbreak, the truth is they've just delayed it. Because avoidance always catches up. The wall eventually cracks. The mask eventually slips. The suppressed emotions eventually find their way out, whether through sudden panic, a midlife breakdown, or an inability to truly connect even when love is right in front of them. I'm not saying this to point fingers. I'm saying this because awareness is the first step. Most avoidants don't even know they're avoidant. They just think they're not emotional or better off alone. But that's not who they are. That's who they had to become. And the beauty in all of this is that attachment styles aren't life sentences. They're blueprints. And blueprints can be revised. They can be studied, understood, and changed. But only when we acknowledge them. Only when we stop glorifying self-sufficiency as the ultimate virtue and start recognizing that strength also means being able to say, I need you, without shame. So if you see yourself in any of this, if you've been holding the world at arm's length for years, understand this. You're not broken. You're not too far gone. You're human. And everything you built to protect yourself served its purpose. But now, it may be time to build something else. Because here's the truth. You can't outrun your need for connection forever. And the longer you try, the heavier that wall becomes. Let that sink in. So let's talk about the wall, not a metaphorical one in passing, but the actual psychological structure that avoidants live behind. Because once you understand this wall, you start to see everything differently. Not just how avoidants behave, but why they do it, and more importantly, what it costs them. The wall isn't just some imaginary line between me and you. It's a fully constructed emotional boundary built over years, sometimes decades, of subtle conditioning. You can think of it like psychological armor, forged out of lived experience. But here's the key. It wasn't built randomly. It was built with purpose. Avoidants use it to create emotional distance, not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. See, people with avoidant tendencies don't wake up in the morning thinking, today I'm going to push people away. It's not conscious. It's automatic. The wall goes up the moment intimacy gets too close. When someone starts asking emotionally loaded questions or expressing too much affection or needing too much, that's when the shutters come down. The avoidant doesn't say this is too much. They just withdraw. They change the subject. They disappear into busyness. They intellectualize. They make it all look normal. But really, what they're doing is protecting their nervous system from what feels like an overwhelming emotional demand. That's the core of this defense. It's not arrogance, it's regulation. Their emotional wall exists because vulnerability has been historically unsafe. And so they became masters at controlling emotional exposure, at editing themselves to avoid risk, pain, and the shame of needing anyone. And that works for a while. The wall gives them space, it gives them independence. It gives them the illusion of control. But like any wall built out of fear, it eventually becomes a prison. Because what keeps pain out also keeps love out. What protects you from rejection also blocks you from intimacy. What shields your emotions also stifles them. That's the paradox of avoidance. It solves one problem while silently creating another. You stop getting hurt by people, but you also stop being seen by them. You avoid the chaos of closeness, but you trade it for the ache of isolation. You feel safe, but you don't feel alive. And let's go deeper, because this isn't just psychology, this is philosophy. We build walls not only to defend against others, but to defend against ourselves. Against our own longing, our own unmet needs, our own internal chaos. The avoidant wall isn't just about shutting people out. It's also about shutting certain parts of the self down. Those vulnerable, needy, emotional parts that were once too much for someone else to handle. So when you meet an avoidant person, or when you are that avoidant person, what you're really seeing is someone who's compartmentalized their emotional world in order to survive. You're seeing someone who has mastered distance as a form of control. Not because they don't want love, but because they don't trust it. Now, let's be honest. This wall works. It allows avoidants to move through life with a sense of autonomy, to function under stress, to seem unaffected when others fall apart. But here's the reality. Functioning isn't the same as thriving, and safety isn't the same as connection. Eventually, the wall becomes a source of suffering, not because it breaks, but because it doesn't, because it holds, even when life is asking it, begging it to fall. You're in a relationship and your partner says, I just want to feel close to you, and your instinct is to pull away. You're faced with grief or loss, and instead of crying or reaching out, you freeze or distract yourself. You're given love, and you doubt it. You're offered comfort, and you reject it, not because you're cold, but because the wall has become your default. And here's the hard truth. That wall doesn't just block emotion, it blocks growth. It keeps you stuck in the same loops, the same patterns, the same lonely echo chamber where no one really sees you, not even yourself. And over time, it chips away at your aliveness. Because no matter how strong you are, we all need connection. We all need to be known, not just admired. We all need to be held, not just respected. So what's the answer? You don't demolish the wall overnight. You start by noticing it. You start by catching those moments, those micro reactions where you retreat. And then you do something radical. You stay. You feel. You speak. You allow the discomfort. And you remind yourself, this isn't danger. This is growth. The wall may have saved you. But if you want to truly live, if you want to love and be loved, it can't be your home forever. The wall is familiar, but the life you want, that's on the other side. Let's talk about the cost, the hidden cost of avoidance. Because up until now, everything I've described has made avoidance sound pretty functional, even practical. And in some ways it is. The emotional distance, the independence, the controlled expression, it can all look very put together, sometimes even admirable. But avoidance doesn't come without a price. And the truth is, that price is paid slowly, quietly, and often invisibly. It accumulates not in a single moment of crisis, but in the day-to-day erosion of what makes us feel human. Avoidants often don't realize what they're giving up, because avoidance isn't about chaos, it's about control. And control feels good. It feels like certainty. It feels like strength. But what it's really doing is building a life that's emotionally minimal, where every feeling is filtered and measured before it can reach the surface. And in that process, something essential gets lost. Not just emotional expression, but emotional experience itself. So let me put it bluntly. When you spend your life avoiding vulnerability, you also avoid deep connection. You avoid intimacy. You avoid authenticity. You avoid letting anyone get close enough to hurt you, but also close enough to heal you. And that's the hidden cost. It's the relationships that never fully form. It's the love that stays surface level. It's the friendships that slowly fade because you never let them see the real you. It's the persistent feeling of being alone, even when you're surrounded by people. And for the avoidant, this loneliness often masquerades as pride. It sounds like, I don't need anyone. But beneath that, it's often no one really knows me. Or worse, no one ever will. And let's get real about what happens inside the avoidant mind. There's this inner dialogue that constantly rationalizes distance. I'm just busy. They're too emotional. I don't do drama. All these statements might feel true in the moment, but they're often just armor. Subtle, well-rehearsed scripts that keep people out and feelings down. It's not that avoidants don't want closeness. It's that they fear what closeness might reveal. Because when you've spent your life being emotionally self-sufficient, admitting you need someone feels like weakness. It feels dangerous, even humiliating. So instead, you numb. You stay in control. You check the boxes. You succeed on paper. You keep your calendar full, your inbox clear, your relationships convenient. But inside, you might feel emotionally flat, disconnected, or even hollow. And that feeling doesn't go away, no matter how hard you work or how well you perform. And here's the catch. Most avoidants don't hit the wall until later in life. Why? Because avoidance is adaptive. It works for a long time. You get through school, you get the job, you stay out of messy relationships, you keep things predictable. But at some point, and it happens differently for everyone, you realize that something is missing, and it's not success, it's not freedom, it's connection. And connection doesn't come from performing well. It doesn't come from being perfect or from maintaining peace at all costs. It comes from being seen fully, emotionally, imperfectly. And that kind of visibility can't happen when you're always managing how much of yourself you allow others to experience. This is the philosophical heart of it. Avoidance trades being known for being safe. But what's the value of safety if it leaves you feeling invisible? And who are we, really, if we're never willing to let our truth, our grief, our needs show up in the presence of another? We live in a culture that glorifies independence. And don't get me wrong, being emotionally self-aware and self-reliant is important. But that's not the same as isolation. It's not the same as emotional self-denial. There's a fine line between strength and suppression. And when avoidance crosses that line, you stop living a full emotional life and start living a performance. You become a version of yourself that is carefully managed, emotionally edited, and at times unrecognizable to even you. That's the hidden cost, not just the relationships that could have been, but the parts of you that never had a chance to be lived. So what's the invitation here? It's simple. Stop treating connection like a luxury or a liability. It's neither. It's a necessity. And you don't have to tear your walls down in a single moment. You just need to stop reinforcing them every time someone gets close. Take the risk of showing one more piece of your real self. Not all of it, just one. Because every moment you choose authenticity over protection, you reclaim a part of your life. The cost of avoidance is real, but so is the reward of connection. And the sooner you stop paying for safety with your emotional freedom, the sooner you start actually living. There's a moment every avoidant fears, whether they realize it or not. It's the moment when the wall they've so carefully built, the one that protected them, defined them, maybe even saved them, starts to crack. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't always look like what you'd expect. It's not necessarily a dramatic meltdown or a huge life event. Sometimes it's as quiet as a breakdown in the middle of a perfectly normal Tuesday. Sometimes it's the realization that they're surrounded by people, but still feel completely alone. Sometimes it's waking up one day and realizing they don't even recognize themselves anymore. This is what I call the avoidance breaking point. The moment the strategies stop working. The moment the wall, once a source of strength, becomes a cage that can't hold the weight of real life anymore. And it almost always comes when life delivers something bigger than the wall was ever designed to handle. It could be the death of a loved one. It could be the loss of a relationship they didn't think would matter, but somehow it does. It could be the experience of profound love, real love, that terrifies them because it demands emotional presence and their old tools just aren't enough to navigate it. Or sometimes it's an accumulation of small ignored feelings, grief, longing, regret, until one day they're too heavy to shove aside. Whatever the trigger is, the experience is the same. The emotional suppression that worked for so long starts to fail. The numbness breaks open. The independence feels hollow. The distance, once comforting, starts to ache in a way that's undeniable. Well, here's the thing. When the wall starts to crack, avoidants usually panic. Not outwardly. Remember, these are the kings and queens of composure. But internally, they will scramble to patch the wall. They'll rationalize, minimize, blame circumstances, distract themselves. They'll double down on independence, telling themselves they just need to get it together, or work harder, or stop being so sensitive. Anything to avoid facing what's really happening. The undeniable need for emotional connection is finally breaking through. And it's terrifying. Because that wall wasn't just about keeping others out. It was about survival. It was about staying in control of their emotional reality. When the wall collapses, it feels like free fall, like being exposed without armor for the first time in a lifetime. And make no mistake, it is disorienting, it is painful, and it is profoundly necessary. Because here's the deeper truth. The wall wasn't protecting them from other people. It was protecting them from themselves, the parts of themselves they didn't feel equipped to face, the grief over needs that were never met, the shame of wanting connection after telling themselves for so long that they didn't, the fear that if they show their real selves, they'll be rejected, humiliated, abandoned. The wall kept all of that at bay until it couldn't. Philosophically, there's something incredibly powerful about this moment. Because collapse is not the opposite of growth. It is growth, if you're willing to face it. It's the moment the false self, the curated, controlled version of you, starts to fall away, making space for something real to emerge. It's not the destruction of who you are. It's the destruction of who you thought you had to be to survive. And yes, it's messy. You might cry more in a week than you have in a decade. You might feel anger, confusion, regret, longing. All the emotions you carefully avoided are suddenly right there, raw and unedited. And your instinct will be to fix it, to control it, to climb back behind some version of the wall. But I'm telling you, don't. Stay in it. Stay with it, because in that chaos, something extraordinary is happening. You're reuniting with your full emotional self. You're reclaiming the parts of you that got locked away behind the need to be strong, to be perfect, to be invulnerable. You're discovering that while vulnerability feels like death to the avoidant mind, it's actually life. It's actually where connection begins. It's where freedom begins. The wall coming down isn't the end of you. It's the beginning of you, maybe for the first time. So if you're standing in that rubble right now, if you feel raw, unprotected, exposed, know this: you're not broken. You're waking up. You're becoming whole. And that's the work of a lifetime. Because here's the truth: the wall can't save you from being hurt, but it can absolutely prevent you from being loved. And at the end of the day, the risk of heartbreak is a small price to pay for the chance to be fully, unapologetically alive. There's a profound shift that happens after the wall comes down, and it's not instant. It's not like you wake up one morning, feel vulnerable for the first time, and suddenly know exactly what to do with all that emotion. No, awakening doesn't look neat. It's messy. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. But make no mistake, it's powerful. Because for the first time, the avoidant realizes that all the things they spent their life avoiding, intimacy, dependency, emotional exposure, are not signs of weakness. They're signs of living, of being human. And more than that, they are necessary for anything meaningful to take root. This is the moment when the avoidant begins to feel the full gravity of their need for connection. And it's not a casual realization. It's not, oh, it'd be nice to have more friends. It's more existential than that. It's the gut level recognition that connection isn't optional. It's essential. It's wired into our biology, our psychology, even our philosophy of being. To deny it is to deny a core part of yourself. And when that truth hits, it hits hard. It reframes everything. Where before love felt like a threat, now it starts to look like an anchor. Where closeness once triggered fear, it now starts to awaken a kind of hunger. A deep, primal yearning to be known, to be understood, to be accepted. Not for the mask you wear, but for the messy, imperfect, vibrant self that's been hidden underneath. And let's be clear, this awakening is terrifying. It's overwhelming, especially if you've spent most of your life building emotional strategies to stay independent and unbothered. To suddenly realize that you need others, that you need love and support and closeness, it feels like your whole identity is crumbling. But that's exactly what needs to happen. Because that old identity, the one that said you were safer alone, stronger, detached, was built on fear, not truth. And the truth is, connection requires risk. There's no way around it. It requires uncertainty, vulnerability, a willingness to be hurt. But what you get in return is immeasurable. A life that feels real, not curated. Relationships that feel nourishing, not transactional. Moments that feel alive, not rehearsed. This is where the philosophical depth kicks in. Because what you're confronting here isn't just a psychological pattern. It's an existential choice, a choice between isolation and belonging, between the illusion of control and the reality of intimacy, between surviving and actually living. And make no mistake, awakening to the need for true connection is not about becoming dependent. It's not about abandoning boundaries or self-respect. It's about recognizing that independence and connection are not mutually exclusive. You don't lose yourself by letting people in. You find deeper versions of yourself. You expand. You grow. You stretch beyond the safe little island you've built for yourself and realize that life, in all its beauty and heartbreak and complexity, happens in relationship, not apart from it. Here's something else nobody tells you. Awakening doesn't feel triumphant at first. It feels raw. It feels uncertain. It feels like stepping out of a fortress and realizing you're standing in an open field with no armor, no weapons, no script. You don't know who will accept you. You don't know who might hurt you. But for the first time, you're not making choices based on fear. You're making them based on truth. And truth, unlike fear, sets you free. And once you've tasted even a small piece of genuine connection, a conversation where you let your real feelings show, a relationship where you risk asking for what you truly need, you can't go back. The old strategies feel hollow. The old isolation feels unbearable. You realize you were never protecting yourself from pain. You were cutting yourself off from the very experiences that give life meaning. And yes, you will get hurt sometimes. That's part of the deal. But you'll survive it. You'll grow because of it. And more importantly, you'll finally feel alive. The real tragedy isn't getting hurt. It's living a whole life untouched by love, untouched by real intimacy, untouched by the full, messy beauty of human connection. The avoidance awakening is realizing that true strength isn't in how well you can isolate, it's in how bravely you can open, again and again, even after it hurts, especially after it hurts. Because every time you choose connection over fear, vulnerability over control, truth over performance, you come home to yourself, to others, to life itself. And that's the real awakening, understanding that in the end, it was never about avoiding pain. It was about finding your way back to love. When the wall finally comes down and the need for real connection becomes undeniable, there's one more challenge avoidants have to face: learning how to live without the wall. And that's not easy, because tearing something down, even if it's no longer serving you, doesn't mean you automatically know how to build something new in its place. This is the part no one talks about enough. After the collapse and the awakening, you're left standing in unfamiliar territory. The old strategies don't work anymore, and the new ones don't come naturally yet. You've spent years, maybe decades, operating through emotional distance, hyperindependence, and control. That was your map. Now it's gone, and what you're left with is something that feels terrifying and exhilarating at the same time: a blank canvas. And I want you to hear this clearly. This isn't about becoming someone else. It's not about swinging to the other extreme and abandoning everything that once made you feel safe. It's about integration. You're not discarding who you were, you're evolving. You're bringing the strongest parts of your avoidant self, your resilience, your focus, your sense of autonomy, into a more connected and emotionally present version of you. But this takes work. Conscious, daily work. Because emotional availability doesn't just appear overnight. You have to practice showing up differently. You have to rewire old habits. You have to notice when you're retreating back into silence, into self-sufficiency, into numbing, and gently choose another path. Not because you have to, but because something deeper in you wants to. That want matters. That desire for something more, something real, is your compass now. Follow it. And let's talk about relationships in this new phase, because this is where the rebuild becomes visible. When you start living beyond the wall, relationships feel different. They're not just functional, they're emotional ecosystems. They reflect back to you what you're willing to reveal. And if you're showing up more honestly, more vulnerably, the dynamic changes. It becomes richer, more nourishing, but it also becomes riskier. Because now, when someone doesn't respond the way you hoped, it actually hurts. And that's the paradox of growth. You become stronger, but you feel more. Feeling more doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awake. And when you're awake, you stop outsourcing your worth to other people's approval. You stop fearing intimacy as a trap and start seeing it as a mirror that reflects both your capacity to connect and the wounds you still carry. This is where self-responsibility becomes everything. Because here's the truth. No one can rebuild your emotional life for you. No partner, no therapist, no friend can do the work of showing up consistently with openness and truth. That's on you. That's your job now. And it's not about perfection, it's about presence. Can you stay emotionally present when someone gets close? Can you pause before retreating? Can you speak your truth even when it shakes? These are the muscles you're building now. And just like physical strength, emotional strength comes from resistance, from choosing a new behavior, even when the old one is easier. One of the most powerful things you can do in this phase is surround yourself with people who honor your growth. People who don't punish you for your past, but challenge you to live from your present. That might mean reevaluating relationships that were built on your old self, the self that didn't ask for much, didn't express much, didn't need much, because now you do, and that's okay. You're allowed to need, you're allowed to express, you're allowed to take up emotional space in the world. This rebuild is not a straight line, it's a spiral. You will revisit old patterns. You'll backslide. You'll feel like you're regressing at times. That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're human. What matters is that you don't give up, that you don't rebuild a new wall just because vulnerability got uncomfortable again. Because this time, you know better. You know that a life built around avoidance isn't a life fully lived. You know that emotional distance doesn't protect you from pain. It just prevents joy from getting in too. You know that connection isn't a threat. It's a birthright. So you keep going. You keep choosing truth over silence. You keep leaning into conversations that matter. You keep letting yourself be seen, little by little. Because every time you do, you're not just rebuilding, you're rewriting the story of who you are. And that story, it's not about the wall anymore. It's about the courage it takes to live without it. Because in the end, healing isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of freedom. And freedom is what happens when you finally decide, I'd rather be real than protected. That's how you live beyond the wall. And that's how you start becoming whole.